recent law, and we're going to talk about naturalizing and citizenship, and they are two different things. So Michaela's going to explain that actually.
So the difference between a certificate of citizenship and a certificate of naturalization is the following. Basically, a certificate of citizenship is how somebody who is already a U.S. citizen gets proof of their citizenship. This happens in cases, for example, if a person is born abroad to U.S. citizen parents, depending on certain requirements. They don't need to go through the process of naturalization. Upon their birth, they've automatically acquired U.S. citizenship. You still do have to file a Form N-600 with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. It is well over $1,000 to file that form right now. It is taking roughly 2 years for that to be issued. But that is for somebody who the only thing they need to do is show that through their parental lineage, they have acquired or derived citizenship upon birth.
And one strategy also is to do a DS-11, which is a passport application. And one might make more sense in your case than another, so it's worth checking in with an attorney to see what makes the most sense for you.
Right, but definitely with the DS-11, which is adjudicated by the Department of State, the cost is well under $1,000.
$130.
Yes. So a certificate of naturalization is when an individual has been a lawful permanent resident for a certain amount of time. They have met certain other requirements, and then they file with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services to become a U.S. citizen. So that is the difference between a certificate of citizenship and a certificate of naturalization. Oh.
There, and it's going now.
Okay,
That's
perfect. Now Kendra will talk about legal mumbo jumbo.
Well, so the law governing naturalization, citizenship as is everything with immigration under the statutes of the Immigration and Nationality Act. So we just put it here. So if you want to have some fun reading. Also, it's important to know that the form itself is the N-400, that all forms for immigration, if you're looking for a benefit, are generally located at U.S.C.I.S.gov. And so when you are trying to apply for to naturalize to the process of becoming a U.S. citizen, that's Form N-400. And it is $725 to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Also, you were mentioning the N-600, that's found there as well. If you just go to USCIS.gov, there's also a whole section that I think is really helpful that's called the Citizenship Resource Center. It has tons of things that you can do to actually help you study, so we can talk about that a little bit more later as well. Just thought it would be interesting to mention some statistics. So in 2021, we just looked up today that there was actually 109,000 or 809,100 new U.S. citizens.
Wow.
And 41% of those citizens were between 30 and 44 years of age. So I was kind of surprised. It's like this younger demographic, but 16 new citizens were over 100 years old, which we thought was super cool. We've definitely had clients that have been in their 90s, but I've never had anyone over 100. Top 5 naturalized citizenship or countries of birth of folks who've naturalized this in 2021 were Mexico, India, Philippines, Cuba, and Dominican Republic. Also interesting. And the median age of lawful permanent residence is well, for when they actually become citizens, is to have their residency for a period of about 7 years. So you can technically be a lawful permanent resident your whole life. You can absolutely do that. Some people don't want to naturalize for different purposes. Maybe their country of birth does not recognize dual nationality. There's some hoops to jump through. If you're from Germany, for example, or China, it can be difficult, but generally people are residents for at least 7 years before they actually decide to naturalize. And then one interesting fact with Oregon is that more than 2 in 5 immigrants in Oregon are naturalized citizens.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the basic requirements to being able to file for naturalization. You must be at least 18 years old at the time of filing. You have to have accrued a certain amount of time in the United States as a permanent resident, and we'll talk about those in more detail later. But the basic rule is you need to have spent at least 5 years in the United States as a permanent resident, 3 years if you're married to a U.S. spouse, and 1 year for certain individuals who have prior military service. During your requisite amount of time as a permanent resident, you have to show that you have continuous residence in the United States, that you have the right amount of physical presence, which are two related but different concepts we will get into. You have to show that when you are filing, you are living in the United States, that you are a person of good moral character, you have an understanding of English language, a knowledge of U.S. history and government, and a commitment to the U.S. Constitution. And we will get into each one of these in further detail. So when can you apply to naturalize? Generally, you can file 5 years after you've been admitted as a permanent resident, and they do allow you to file 90 days prior to that anniversary, so just keep that in mind. One of the exceptions is if you have been married to a United States citizen and are still married and living together with that U.S. citizen, you can apply for naturalization after you've been a permanent resident for 3 years. And again, the 90-day early filing also is allowed in that case too. Also, certain members of the U.S. military, you can file after you've been a permanent resident for just 1 year. And so that is something that is very good to keep in mind.
Okay, I'm gonna just pause for 1 second. I'm just getting some feedback from online. They're just saying the sound is a little fuzzy, and I wonder if it's because this owl is so far back. So I'm going to move him a little forward. Yeah. And hopefully that will help, but this is technology, the fun that we have. I'll just check the camera and make sure that that's on. Yeah, let's see, is that better for those of you online? And just use that Q&A because I'm not sure how that got disabled. Oh, I'll shift the camera.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, just so I can see the, what am I talking about?
yeah, that's okay. Sorry, I'm not giving anybody a migraine. It's moving pretty quickly. It's like driving a boat, it's like the reverse, and I'm really bad at that. Let's see. That's okay, let's keep going and they'll let me know if the sound is not any better there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the difference between continuous residence and physical presence. So they sound similar, it's confusing, as is the law. It all sounds the same, like I should live here, right? Well, as a lawful permanent resident, of course, it is important to be residing here. But there's very specific nuances that immigration officer is looking for when they're going to review your case. So when you're a lawful permanent resident, you could have perhaps decided, you know what, I'm gonna go back home and to my home country and be there for a couple of years. Well, that is breaking not only continuous residence, but that's breaking physical presence. What you need to do for continuous residence is maintain a permanent dwelling. You need to have a home here, you need to have an address. So I'm sure as a resident, you've heard that you need to, the rule is generally 6 months to be in the United States. Or I'm sorry, if you're going to depart the United States, you should not be outside of the United States for more than 6 months. Absences of 1 year or more are very problematic. But you have circumstances where people will be outside of the country for a very long time and re-enter, and the Customs and Border Protection, they might not have identified that, and you re-enter and it doesn't seem like a big deal. But when you're naturalizing, you're opening the door to an officer to look at all your exits and entry history. So if you're looking at the Form N-400, it's going to specifically say, how many times have you left the country in the last 5 years or last 3 years? And you have to list your date of departure and your date of return. It's calculated, added up, and they are going to check into all of that. So that's, of course, a very important thing to keep in mind if you're going to apply for naturalization. If you had a period of outside of the United States longer than 6 months, it might not be the right time to apply. One of the other things, there are some exceptions for continuous residents for, like, for example, military members, but that's something to, and there are some exceptions as well if you file something called an I-131 a reentry permit that can allow you to request time to be outside of the United States as a lawful permanent resident longer than that 6-month period in certain circumstances. So there's that as well. Let's see, oh, and then of course we talked about, do need to show that you have resided here in the state that you're going to. So if you're in Oregon, if you just moved here from Washington State, you need to wait for those 90 days before you can actually apply in this jurisdiction, or they're going to have you go back to Washington for your naturalization interview. So going further with physical presence, this is an actual calculation. This is where they're counting the days. So if you are applying for naturalization under the 5-year rule, they're going to actually be counting 30 months for where have you been and checking in. And they have the ability in their system to look and see your reentries. And so it's really, really important to keep really good records of your departures and reentries, because if you want to naturalize in the coming years, you're going to have to add those up. And if you come anywhere close to being outside of the country for a period of more than half of that 5-year rule, then it's going to be really come down to the wire. So you want to keep meticulous records. But generally, I mean, I have a lot of clients who are like, I go to Mexico for, 2 weeks every year around the holidays. I don't know the exact dates. That's fine, because on the form, you're going to see it says were you gone for less than 6 months. If you don't know the exact dates, it's not going to be the end of the world, because we very successfully for years been able to just say approximately this date is when I left and this is approximately when I came back, and that's generally fine. What they're really looking for is that 6-month period where you gone for longer than that or not. And that's when they start to actually do the math a little bit more.
Okay, now we are going to discuss good moral character. So good moral character is one of the requirements. Somebody applying for naturalization needs to show that during the statutory periods, whether the 5 years or the 3 years or the 1 year, that you were required to have been a permanent resident, that you have been a person of good moral character. Like many things in immigration law, there is no definition of what exactly good moral character is, but there are certain acts that if you, or crimes, commit these, then you are going to be found to not have good moral character. In the statute, in the Immigration and Nationality Act, there's actually a section that states what acts, like being a habitual drunkard, giving false or fraudulent testimony, will prevent you from being able to establish that you have good moral character during that requisite period. So a lack of good moral character may also include not paying for child support, commission of certain crimes, alcoholism, disregard of the laws, well-being of the community. Not filing your taxes and or having outstanding tax debt is also going to prevent you from establishing good moral character. And for males, especially between the ages of 18 and 26, if you fail to register for the selective service, you can also be deemed to lack good moral character.
However, I would just mention with the tax debt thing, that sounds concerning, like, oh, I don't want to file for naturalization. If I've had clients who, yeah, they have back taxes that they're paying, but they bring the proof that they have a payment plan, and that's been sufficient to show, look, I'm complying with the IRS, I'm paying, and that's enough to fulfill the good moral character requirement. With selective service, that one gets complicated because it's like a lot of people who are here undocumented in between 18 and 20 don't know that they're supposed to be registering for this. And so, or they don't speak the language, maybe it came in the mail and they didn't understand it. So we are also pretty successful with explaining, yeah, like I didn't know this requirement. Yes, I was here during that time period, but so it is of course advisable to register for selective service if you're in between that age group and the male, but if you haven't, it doesn't mean that you're going to be precluded completely. You can typically explain it.
Right. And one other thing, a lot of times you will be registered without knowing if you're granted residency during that age, right? We've had clients who, unbeknownst to them, had been registered. So there's a website where you can go and enter your information. They'll be able to tell you immediately whether or not you're registered.
Yeah, I've had clients be like, nope, I haven't, and I enter in their social, there it is.
Right.
So, worth looking.
Right.
I've got, if you guys are game,
Yeah.
I've got somebody who's raised their hand, and there is an option here to allow to talk, so I'm just gonna see if we can, rather than having them type.
Yeah,
in, let's see. if this works. Okay. D, I see you've got your hand raised. Did you have something you wanted to ask? I think I made it so you can speak through the Zoom. But you are muted, so you'll have to unmute Zoom on your end. And if that doesn't work, go ahead and just type whatever your question is into the chat. So if we can continue on, we'll see if that comes up or not.
Okay, so any individual who is a permanent resident who has any criminal history, we definitely recommend that you talk with an attorney to assess the crime prior to filing. Even misdemeanors, which might not seem to be that significant, can trigger removability, which means a permanent resident can be placed into removal proceedings and need to explain to an immigration judge why he or she should not be removed from the country. If you do have a criminal history, you should obtain to take to an attorney the certified police records, the court disposition. We can do an FBI background check, certificates of completion of any court requirements such as attending anger management classes, any successful completion of diversion programs. And it is very, very important to remember that drugs are controlled by federal law and they are not following, the U.S.C.I.S. when adjudicating a naturalization application is not following state law regarding what drugs may or may not be illegal. So in the eyes of the federal government, no drug is legal.
Which makes it really confusing for individuals when you see a dispensary on every corner and it's legal. As an immigrant, you're subject to that federal law, and so federal law considers marijuana a controlled substance, which is in the same category as a lot of other drugs.
There's no difference between marijuana and cocaine in the eyes of the federal government right now, as far as trying to naturalize.
Right, and there is actually some talk about changes to that categorizing. But I think one of the things it's just very confusing for individuals. So just be aware of that. It can be problematic when coming up in these types of interviews.
Right, and again, just to reiterate, there are certain crimes that will not have prevented you from becoming a permanent resident, but then may trigger your removability, such as certain firearms offenses, domestic violence, violation of restraining orders. So any time you have a criminal incident and you're considering naturalization, it's really important just to get that screened by an immigration attorney.
And one thing to note about criminal history too, if you're filing your naturalization application without representation, of course you can. But as we've recommended, it's good to talk to somebody to make sure that there's nothing that could make you deportable or be a problem. But in filing your application, it's just important to remember you don't necessarily have to provide all of those documents with your application. It might be better to speak with an attorney. You can file your application without those documents, and they shouldn't necessarily be provided to the officer at the interview if they're not requested. So just keep that in mind as well.
Discretion. So naturalization is not an automatic benefit that is going to be bestowed on somebody just because they meet all of the requirements. You still have to be granted naturalization in the discretion of the Attorney General of the United States. So if you have certain incidents from your past that might have happened 20 years ago, but the officer doesn't feel you're being very forthright or you're not showing rehabilitation or contrition, that officer can still deny your application based on a discretion. So how do you boost questionable GMC? Good moral character. Sorry, that's lawyer speak. We love our acronyms. So if you have questionable GMC, or there are certain things in your past that aren't necessarily reflective of the person that you are, what we recommend is that you get letters from your church. If you have a good relationship with your pastor or with a priest who can talk about what a good person you have become. Letters from friends, family members, community members who can say, oh yes, this is the coach of my daughter's softball team. He's a great person. We've never had any issues, etc. If you can show a lot of family members here in the United States, birth certificates for children, birth certificates for spouses, residency cards for family members, those will all go to discretion as well. They'll look at the length of your residency in the United States, proof that you have taxes. And if there are any past criminal issues, for example, if somebody had a DUI 20 years ago, they can show I have been a member of AA. Since that time, here is a letter from my sponsor indicating that I attend weekly meetings, etc. So again, like Kendra said, these are documents that you should take with you to an interview, not necessarily giving it to the officer as you walk in or filing it with the lockbox, but just something to have in case your discretion becomes a question or a point of contention during the interview itself.
And after this PowerPoint, we're gonna do like a little run through of how we've got clients, what they should bring with them. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So of course, one of the requirements is the most popular to discuss is the English and government history and government questions. So for literacy of the English language, you have to do the interview in English if you do not fulfill one of the exceptions. So the exceptions are listed here. If you are 50 years or older at the time of filing and you've lived as a lawful permanent resident for 20 years in the United States, you can do your naturalization interview in your native language. And as is if you're 55 or older and been here as a resident for 15 years. I guess that's for the district government. We'll go on the next page. But here we go. For the civics test, do know that if you're 65 or older, you only have to study 25 of the 100 questions. There are 100 that you have to study, and when you're in the actual interview, they're going to ask you 10 of those 100 questions, and you have to answer 6 of those 10 questions right to pass. And it's important to know too that you can show, sometimes officers kind of go off the cuff and will like ask things like, why do you want to become a U.S. citizen and things like that. So you can be prepared for those types of questions, but generally most questions derive specifically from that list of questions. So I don't know if we have the slide about that's next. But the reading and writing portion, do we have that? Well, so they're gonna have you read a sentence. And they're generally from that list of questions or what are your more recent?
So all of the words are from that 100 question study guide. So recent questions that we have been asked, in what month do we celebrate Columbus Day?
Let's get that one.
What country is north of the United States? How many US senators are there? So those are the types of questions that we have, and what you need to do is read it off the tablet, and then for the writing portion, they will give you the answer. It's not a bonus question you have to answer.
Right.
You will be told exactly what to write.
Right. So they're gonna present to you a sentence you read, and the answer is what you write. And you have to write it on a little iPad
With a stylus, I know.
which is like kind of awkward for people, but it's generally nothing very difficult. And honestly, the officers, I feel like in Portland, the officers want you.
They do.
And then they're patient.
And you have 3 chances. So if you don't read or write the first sentence, you will get 3 sentences to try.
And also important to know, you have to, and we talk about this, I think a little later in our prep, but they have to take the first answer that comes out of your mouth when you're answering those questions. So I know when I'm nervous, I'm like, take your breathe, go through it in your head. Okay. Okay. Don't just like start brainstorming out loud because they have to take that answer. So take your time to think, and you paid a lot to be there. They can wait. Just give yourself a moment because the nerves will pass once you really kind of go through your study questions in your head and say, I know the answer to that one. I've had folks, the interview itself shouldn't be that long, but I've had go through the whole list of questions on your application, and that test has taken half an hour for those 10 questions. But you know what? They have.
And one other thing, you can only skip a question. Since you only have to answer 6 out of the 10 correctly, if you are stumped on one, you can say, can I skip this one? And they are more than happy to go on to the next question, and will only come back to that question if that's one of the ones that will count for 6 correct.
And you can ask them to say it again, or say it slower, maybe even rephrase it depending on the officer. So, take advantage of that. If you're really stuck on it, just have them say it again, or maybe say it differently. One of the things too to know is that if you don't pass one of these portions, so if your writing just wasn't quite passable, if your reading wasn't passable, or if you just didn't get all the questions, enough questions right to pass, they're gonna give you another chance under that application. So you don't have to refile all over again. What they'll do is give you an opportunity to come back in a month or so. Is it really that fast?
It was last time.
Okay. So, and but you, of course, we're here in Central Oregon, you have to schlep back to Portland and do that test again. But you only have to do that portion of it, you only have to, you have to do the whole interview. You have to do the whole N400. That hasn't happened to me before, it was just a test. Well, okay, so be prepared to do it all again, which is fine though, because the N400 is all your information, this is stuff that you know. So really, once you get that second chance to cram and get ready to pass it, but if you don't pass in that second time, you do have to refile.
Okay.
Pop quiz
When
time.
when you have to refile, do you have to pay the fee again?
Yes, you have to pay the fee again. So study.
Yeah.
And important to know, and maybe we're going to talk about processing time at some point, but right now it says in Portland it's 12.5 months.
Or 13.5, over a year.
That's what we've been seeing. So from the time of filing your N400 to the time of actually being interviewed, it's about a year. It has been, but the last 3 applications I filed, 3 months. So folks study right when you file, because I have people that are like, oh, you know, wait and study when we get the interview notice, and it comes fast. When you get your interview notice, you only have like 3 to 4 weeks.
Right. And as we mentioned before, the study guide on the U.S.C.I.S, so you can print out, they have the actual list of 100 questions. They also have flashcards, they have MP3s, I believe, and they also have an interactive test. Well, the computer will grab 20 questions and you just go through it and it will tell you how many you've gotten correct at the end. And I think one thing that's very important though, is if you have somebody to practice with you, somebody to read the questions to in English, so you can practice hearing it in English and responding in English, that I think is invaluable.
I have folks that'll just listen to it while they're working, or in the car. And like YouTube, a lot of people look at the YouTube videos that are helpful, and I just saw on USCIS.gov in the Citizenship Resource Center, they posted like a 4-part series, like to practice.
We do have some materials here that people can check out as well.
Oh, great.
And there's an ebook, and I know we used to have the citizenship kits that have the flashcards. I can't guarantee that we still do. It's been a little while since those came out.
You can always check in with us. We have our
Yeah.
information at the end here and we can provide those. We have them in our meeting. Pop quiz done. Jenny, do you want to do the pop quiz?
I'll do.
Or people can also answer online too.
And I do have, I have a very specific question. We'll
Okay.
answer this before the pop quiz. If my 5 years are due on November 2023, how soon should I start filing the N400?
So you can file it up to 90 days before the anniversary of your 5 years. No earlier, because then it can be rejected for lack of jurisdiction. But 90 days before you hit that 5 years. So if that's November, that's October, September, August, whatever day in
The day of your residency. Yeah, so. Yeah. Hey. Let me get the easy ones to you, Jenny.
Thank you.
Name one state that borders Mexico.
California.
During the Cold War, what was the main concern of the United States?
I mean, there's a lot. I could.
There were.
But like, I mean, Russia, like, what, I don't understand what they're looking for. Communism. There we go.
Thank you.
That's good.
I
We
knew
dive
that.
deeper. Yeah, sorry. It was funny because that was one of the questions they asked me at my permanent resident interview, was if I was.
Oh,
if
when you
I
got
was belonging.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Name one branch of the government.
The legislature.
See, you're. When is the last day you can send in federal income tax forms?
April 15. We gotta do that.
Halfway there.
It's coming up. Oh, we're
Um,
getting a lot here. I'm getting answers on the chat too.
okay.
Yeah. Good with the
Name
interest.
one right only for United States citizens that you should never, ever, ever do as a lawful permanent resident.
Duty.
That's one. That's what,
I know, because I did
that is.
vote.
So that's actually, that answer is under what is one responsibility
Okay.
that is only for
But you
US
should never do
citizens.
it.
Beatrice got it. One of our online people vote.
Good
Yes.
job, Beatrice.
Yes.
Yes. How many was that? Did you bet that one? We'll give it for. Okay. What ocean is on the east coast of the United States?
The Atlantic.
Oh, there you
Yeah,
go.
grew up on it.
So these last two slides, there are some exceptions, of course, to the English and civics exam. If you have a medical disability, it's hard, get this question often where it's like, if you come from let's say you didn't finish high school, or if your education did not allow you to
Learn how to read
read, write, those don't generally rise to the level of medical disability. You have to work with your own medical doctor to actually fill out a form, the N648, and they will sign off on what that disability is that will prevent you from being able to learn English or pass the civics exam.
Right, or if you have like a cognitive decline and you're not able to memorize, then that's something that your doctor should be able to assist you with.
And also there's accommodations. It's a different type of medical waiver. Like if you are deaf or blind and wheelchair, I mean, there's the wheelchair accommodations are office. I mean, this is all required under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So we were gonna, I got wonky too. We are located in downtown Bend. There's kind of our number, you can see it. So what we wanted to do next was just talk about specifically in Portland, how do we prep our clients when we sit down with them, got the interview notice, what do we do? So generally the flow of the case is that in our firm, let's say, okay, we get together, we file the N400. With the N400, we usually just include,
They'll add that on.
I don't know.
I don't see that they are, but the one issue with the credit cards is if your bank thinks it's some weird fraudulent charge, you
Right.
must accept that charge, otherwise they can decline it. Or if you don't have it, if it's your debit card that you're using as a credit card
Mhm.
and you don't have sufficient funds in there, they will try to run it 2 or 3 times, but then it gets kicked back.
Right.
So a lot of times we just recommend money orders or a cashier's check, because then there's no question that those funds have already been withdrawn.
Mhm.
Same thing with checking account, but anyway,
Yeah.
And make sure to not have an old check, like if it's more than 6 months, it's not gonna be valid and you'll get kicked back. Money orders too. So once you file, you get your receipt notice, you're waiting for your biometrics appointment, at which point you're going to be heading to Portland for them to do digital fingerprints, photos, doing a general background check.
And sometimes though, what they've been trying to do, especially with the pandemic, is if they can recapture or reuse your previously captured biometrics, they're not having people travel. I think there's a concerted effort to cut down on having numerous people in that application support center. So a lot of times now we're seeing people who have gone through adjustment or have previously had deferred action for childhood arrivals. They already have their fingerprints and they will just take those and rerun all the background checks.
And there's always, so we didn't actually put this in here, but if you're filing an I-90, if you are, like, let's say you let your card expire, or it's about to expire in the next, 3 months, it's advisable to file an I-90 along with your N400, because this is a frustrating part of it. They didn't used to require this, but let's say your card's expired. Now, if your card is expired, that does not mean you're not a resident. Just like if I lose my US birth certificate, that does not make me not a US citizen. It's just that you don't have a valid card, right? So immigration, when in the naturalization process, wants to see that you have a valid card. So what will happen is, if you, let's say, it's expiring in a few months, you file your I-90 around the same time as your N400, which feels weird because it's like 2 different fees. It's like $540 for the I-90, $725 for the N400. But what can happen is if you file it and your card's about to expire or has expired, if you file the N400, they might do a request for evidence that says, hey, we need to see that you filed your I-90. And I've had that happen a couple times, but I've also had it not happen.
Right, it used to be that if you filed for naturalization, you still had 6 or more months on your permanent residency card, you wouldn't necessarily have to file your I-90. But I think especially if it's taking over a year in certain jurisdictions for your N-400 to be scheduled for interview, a lot of my clients don't want to be without their permanent residency in case they have to travel. And that's a whole other area because the I-90s, which is the form you use to renew your permanent residency card, those you cannot file until you have 6 months or less validity on your card, and they're taking 2 years now to
Yeah.
adjudicate.
So this makes it ridiculous, okay, so like, you file your I-90 and the N-400 at the same time. You get your biometrics appointment for your I-90. You go to your biometrics appointment, and then a month later, say this just happened to somebody. A month later, they get another biometrics appointment for the N-400. And it's like, this is ridiculous. So in that situation, we reached out to the local office in Portland and said, like, can't they recapture? Because the practice is kind of all over the place. But it has been, that they have been doing it, has been very helpful, but it's not every time. So it is possible to try to avoid it, but you know, it's what the notice says. If you get an appointment that you want to reschedule, you have to send it to this location, and that takes a while.
It's taking a really long time. So with those biometric appointments, go to it if you can, because having it rescheduled for the client missing it, we've seen delays in cases of up to a year.
Yeah.
So,
And if you don't go, it's considered abandoned. So even though they just have your fingerprints, you gotta comply if you don't get notice from U.S.C.I.S. otherwise. But so just to like, oh yeah.
That's finish your thought.
To close the loop with the I-90 thing, it's super confusing because like now we're seeing people going to interviews in 3 months of their naturalization filing. Well, what happens with the I-90?
you do not get that money back.
You do not get that money back and you do not get your new green card. What's gonna happen is they're gonna withdraw your application or cancel your application there at your naturalization interview. Because you're gonna be walking out of there with your naturalization certificate. They don't want you to have a green card.
So just going back to the, a couple of slides ago, I got a question about the exemptions. So, and this is a specific one, so I'm not sure, if someone is 65 or older, did not go to school and has difficulties learning, but has not been more than a resident for more than 10 years, can they be exempt from the test?
Yes, so the exemptions, when we talk about the 50-20 or the 55-15, those are just statutory exemptions. And so that is, if you go in, I'm 50 years of age and I've been a permanent resident for 20 years, I can do this in my native language, and I do not need to do the written and writing portion at all, right? But with the medical exemption is if you have a learning disability, if you would otherwise have to do the civics and the reading and writing, but you have a disability that your doctor has documented and said, this individual is severely dyslexic, and so therefore it is impossible for them to read, to study, to do X, Y, Z, or they suffered a concussion that has led to cognitive decline or a stroke or any type of other medical condition, the doctor can then fill out that form to exempt you from having to do any of that, basically. So there are two different things. One is a statutory exemption and the other one is a medical exemption only for people who qualify and submit them.
Yeah, and so if you're over 65, you do, the only benefit is that you have to study less questions. So only there, so when you look at the list of the PDF that they have on there, USCIS.gov, there's stars, like an asterisk next to each question that they should study, and below it will tell them, you know, that rule. Okay, so when we're going back to the prep, what were we gonna, so we
Talk about what we include.
okay, so so our client, you know, goes and gets their fingerprints done, okay, like you after you file the application, you get your receipt notice, you get your fingerprints done, and then you wait, like I said, right now, it's only about 3 months. So you get your interview notice, which is typically 3 to 4 weeks before your actual interview. Read the notice. It's gonna tell you to bring all sorts of stuff. And, you know, gather those things. We generally, so when we schedule a client to sit down and prepare them for their interview, we tailor it to whatever that person's set of facts is, right? So if they need to boost good moral character, let's get on writing those letters, but we always ask them to bring 3 to 5 years of taxes. All of their passports expired and not expired, ID from the state, so, you know, your driver's license, and then,
All
birth
permanent
certificate.
resident, and all permanent resident cards, not just your most valid one. So because you don't have to turn those in when you're renewing, it's important for you to bring like your first one, or if you've received a conditional residency card, bring all of those in because they will want to collect those from you
At the oath ceremony or at the interview?
at the oath ceremony.
That's it, okay.
What
So-
if, what if you strike them? I don't know if I.
Then you just inform them that
Okay.
you, because that's what they want to know,
Right,
is that it's destroyed and not when you
Yeah.
distribute it to somebody else. So yeah, so we're gonna ask you to bring your birth certificate with a translation, so that can be kind of like, oh my gosh, I need my birth certificate. So it's good to start when you're starting the process, to think, oh, maybe I should order that and make sure I get that from my consulate in time. If it's based on the 3-year rule, your marriage certificate, if you've been divorced, your divorce decree. I just like to have all of those, you know, birth certificates of kids, just in case. Like 85 to 90% of the time in a clean case, meaning no inadmissibility or deportability issues, no criminal history, they're not gonna look at anything. They are gonna look at your IDs, you know, that's the first thing they wanna see when you walk in. But it's really important though, because if you don't, like, sometimes an officer's just like, can I see your birth certificate? And you're like, oh, it's been a while since I've heard that. But if they ask, for it, you wanna have it.
Right, general rule of thumb is what I always say is it's better to have it and to not need it than to not have it and to really need it, right? And so, and we definitely say like, here's your stack that's gonna be your go-to that you're gonna have with you, and then have like in a file of facts, everything else that you hopefully just leave on the floor.
Yeah, and organize it and know where things are, because there's nothing like, officers have been seeing a million people all day long, they're, you know, depending on what time of day your interview's at, but they don't wanna be sitting there, really fumbling, have it organized and know where everything is, because the last thing you want is a crappy. Right? Okay, so we're gonna go through everything and make sure you've got the documents you need. Again, if you have criminal history, make sure you have all those documents. But once you get to your interview, you know, you don't necessarily have to, you're not just walking in there and giving them everything. You're just gonna wait and see if they need any of the stuff you brought. Okay, so in general, when the officer is asking you questions, keep in mind, it can be a really informal feeling in USCIS, you know, but this is an officer who has the power to approve or deny your application. And so this is, it feels like an office, but it's kind of like you're in court, right? This is the decision under the law that the officer is making on your behalf. And so keep that in mind when you walk in there. So when you're in the waiting area, well, should we do the orientation to go up and how you get in there first? And before we kind of go through what happens in the actual interview? Yeah, so if specifically talking about Portland, the Portland U.S.C.I.S office is in the Pearl District in Portland, and you do the parking part.
Okay, so one
I
of the
would
things,
walk there.
one of the things that I always tell my clients is
Explain it.
there's a lot of traffic parking right around there, right? You might be an hour waiting for your interview. The last thing you want to be thinking about is, oh my God, I have to go with my car, or I have to put money in the meter. Find at least a 4-hour parking spot or one of the all-day lots that's within a block or so, and do the max time. Because it is going to just be one less thing that you're going to have to be concerned about. So another thing is COVID restrictions are being lifted right now. However, if there's a spike in cases, there might be new requirements. So as of last week, when I was there, it used to be you could enter the building no more than 15 minutes ahead of time, and they would make you stand outside and let you in, usher you in one at a time. That was not the case this time. You could go in. You have to show your appointment letter as soon as you go in, no ID when you're passing through the metal detectors, but you're gonna have to take off your belt, your shoes, take all your electronics, put them in the bins, like you're at the airport, pass through the metal detector, gather your things, and then you go up to the second floor, where you will then present your permanent resident card and your appointment notice to an officer at window 3 right now, but it's on the big waiting room that's there. They will sit you down, take your appointment letter, verify that you are the person who is appearing. They will take a digital picture of you and have you put your left and right index finger on a digital scanner to verify your identity. Then they'll say, please have a seat and wait for the officer to call you. So you go and you sit in this big waiting room and you wait for an officer to exit the doors by the vending machines and they will call your name.
So don't worry when you go into the waiting area, make sure that you're checking in. Don't worry that that's your actual interview. I've had
that once.
Because they did do that for a period of time where they made people do the questions right there in the waiting area, which is very uncomfortable for people. But so yeah, just be prepared to wait. That's the other thing. So basically, if you have a morning interview, it's not going to be as long. If you have an afternoon interview, it can take longer because you can imagine there's about 12-ish officers and they can get backed up. Once you've actually sat down and waited, I mean, thankfully there's a vending machine and water and restroom, but the shortest it's been for me is 5 minutes of a wait, and the longest it's been like 2.5 to 3 hours. So like 3 hours. Oh yeah, I remember that. But, so you just be prepared. And so so you don't know what officer it's gonna be. They're gonna come out from those double doors and call your name, and they're gonna take you back to the little maze back there of all the different offices. So generally, when you go into the office, it's a small office. It's not like a courtroom, nothing like that. It's generally just going to be you and the officer. They might have an officer in training. In some cases, they might videotape it for whatever reason. That can be possible. It's not common, but they can. Sometimes the doors open, sometimes the doors close.
They've been closed lately. It was open during the pandemic, which was a whole other thing. But,
Yeah.
so they're mostly closed now, but you will go in and before you sit down, the officer will say, please remain standing, raise your right hand and repeat after me. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that any testimony you provide will be the whole truth during this interview? You will say, yes, I do. Then you will see, and from that point on, everything and anything you say is under the penalty of perjury.
So that was perfect segue to kind of what we were talking about before. It's like, when you're there, remember what you're doing, right? This is, and it can feel really informal. And of course, you're gonna go with the vibe of the officer, because some officers are just ready to move right on. They just want to get through the next, but and some officers are chatty and some officers like see, hey, like you were here, that's interesting. And you just kind of go with the flow of that interviewer, but be aware, everything can be used against you that you state. So let the officer lead, is what I'm saying. So the officer is going to decide, are we going to go through the naturalization form first, look at all those questions, or are we going to do your history and government and reading and writing first? And some officers give the option, which is, have you done that?
I've not. I would say 99% of the time, the officer is going to do the English language civics portion first and then move on to the actual application.
And then they do the exam at the end.
No, they do the civics and
Oh,
the
they do.
English,
Oh,
and
okay.
then they'll go through the application itself. That's what the vast majority of my office.
I feel like I've had more people like ask what the applicant prefers. But I mean, you've been doing more lately.
So, long story short, it can happen anyway.
Yeah, it can, so be prepared. If they give you the option, in my opinion, from what I've seen over 10 years of going to these interviews, just get the exam over with. If they give you the option, do the exam, because your nerves are just gonna calm right down after you pass that thing. So either way, it's a two-part thing. They're gonna be like going through your N400, which is, your 5 years of where you worked, 5 years of where you lived, your exit and entry history, the questions of, are you a terrorist, all those things. And then they're gonna ask if you agree to take the oath and all of that. You're gonna pass your reading and writing, you're gonna pass your test. And then at that point, they will almost always let you know what the decision is. You've been approved, which is generally what's happened. So
that does not mean that they will be able to swear you in that day.
yeah.
So that is another thing. What they've been doing currently is if you are scheduled for that day, they'll have an oath ceremony that starts around 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They are still limiting the number of people who can attend those oath ceremonies. And so it's basically like, as the officers are approving, they are scheduling people for that oath ceremony, and once it's full, it's full.
Right.
So if you have an early morning, you might be like, oh, I have to be in Portland at 7:40, that's actually a good thing, because that way you have a higher probability of being in that oath ceremony as opposed to having a 12:30 or a later interview, in which case you won't be in that oath ceremony.
And then it usually takes 2 to 3 months to schedule. So our goal always is to get our clients sworn in that day. Because we're in Central Oregon, especially in the winter, we want to make sure that we can take care of it all. And it's wonderful to be able to go in and pass everything and then leave with your naturalization certificate. We can't guarantee that that's going to happen. But in certain circumstances, you might be able to present like, look, like my job is not going to let me go, you know, like, or the travel is really difficult right now because of the weather. You can, in certain circumstances, ask for a desk ceremony. Some officers will be willing to do that. And so it just depends if, like, let's say it's a 2 o'clock interview and you really like, we do this, some may be able to do that. Right. So yeah, generally the officer, like that will happen. You get sworn in that day, ideally, or afterwards you wait to get your
So are
oath
you
ceremony
just like in
notice.
kind of a limbo if you have to wait 2 months for the swearing in?
You're
not.
still a permanent resident, they will not
Okay.
take your card from you, so
Okay.
you are a permanent resident up until you raise your right hand and take that oath of allegiance to the United States. At that point, you are basically giving up your residency for your citizenship. So it does feel like a limbo, but it only means they're delaying it. But it's just very important, if you do have that 2 to 3 month delay, that you are not doing anything to jeopardize your
Because
ability.
they can still
Oh, yes.
revoke it.
Yeah, and actually what happens is if you're not sworn in the same day, or even if you are sworn in the same day, you still leave the office with a sheet of paper that you have to fill out and say, since your interview, have you been married or divorced or had any change in your legal status? Have you departed the country? Have you committed a crime? Have you committed a crime for which you've not been arrested? Have you done anything to jeopardize your ability to
But
naturalize?
you can't depart the country.
You
You
can,
can't depart the
absolutely.
country, but I am always like, if you can hold off for a minute, that'd be great, because what if your oath ceremony comes when you're outside of the country, but if you do depart the country, you need to notate it on that.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's just to say that you're still a permanent resident up until that time, so don't do anything to jeopardize your permanent residency. Or
Mhm.
anything to change the good moral character determination.
Right, so let's see if we kind of hit everything that we wanted to talk about. Oh, be okay with uncomfortable silences.
Yes, that is what
big one.
we always give our clients, because you are sitting there, the officer might be typing at their computer, since all the forms are now on the computer, so the officer has your physical A file, but that is not what he or she is looking at. They are sitting there on their computer. And it's a bit awkward because you're sitting there, you've just come all this way and all of a sudden it's silent. That's fine. Be silent. Sit there, collect your thoughts, breathe,
Yeah,
think
steady.
about in your head. And again, as Kendra said, let the officer drive the train.
Mhm.
So, and I have seen it where individuals feel like I need to fill this void with words.
I tend to be one of those people, if you didn't notice. So don't do it. Just like, hey, and I struggle, because I'll be like, oh, that's an interesting thing on the wall or whatever, but it's really not the time. Just let them do their job. If they want to fill the space, they can,
Right.
you know, but really and the reason is, you don't want to, like, when you start talking, sometimes things go in a direction you never would have thought. And we don't need to even play with that. Let's keep it clean, let's keep it simple. And and because think about it too, there's oftentimes a delay with their computer, or there's an issue with some sort of thing. So you just kind of like go with the flow and wait. And now, so, okay, upon approval, they're gonna have you review everything on the iPad, make sure that everything looks good, that they're actually you're signing off on it, and they're going to be printing that on your naturalization certificate, which you hopefully be getting that day if you're getting sworn in. And then the ceremony itself is really, I mean, it's pretty quick. How long is it? They're at 1:30 every day. And they're still doing it at 1:30, right?
So yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's half an hour, 45 minutes at the most. I don't know if they're allowing guests to accompany people right now. But you can have guests come with you and wait in the waiting room. It used to be that you could have family and friends come and actually see you get sworn in, but I don't think they're doing that as of yet,
Okay.
which is kind of disappointing.
Yeah,
But so that is the goal.
and so one of the things on the questions on the form is like, do you swear to take the oath of allegiance, or do you, like, don't worry that you're gonna have to memorize any of that.
Right.
So what they will do when you're being sworn in is they're going to say it and you're going to repeat it as a
Line
group.
by line, not the entire.
So don't worry about memorizing anything, other than those examples.
Is it time for our,
We were gonna do a mock interview.
do you have any other questions? We can take questions.
One thing I forgot to say,
I
sorry,
didn't see if any, not yet, but I'll just wait.
dress like you're going to a job interview.
Yeah.
Don't have a marijuana shirt.
Sometimes.
I'm not saying that happened.
Don't show up for your attorney prep appointment with questionable clothing either.
Bald eagle, black. I think that we covered everything. So we were gonna actually sit down and do kind of like a little mock interview if we have time to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, and also please, we would like to open it up for questions too.
Yeah,
If anybody
that's more important
has
than
questions.
this.
But it's been good because we've been taking some of the questions through the presentation, but if any others come in, I will let you know.
Like, I have to sit down, and I'm gonna be the applicant, Michaela's gonna be the officer. And she's actually used to be at a period in her life, an ICE attorney. So she's got the government.
got the
blood
inside knowledge.
sometimes.
Okay, so should we give your little brief background on?
Oh, wait, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
scoot over a little bit. But there you go.
okay, so I'm me, and I had a DUI 10 years ago, not really. But that's a good moral character factor, right? But it's outside of the good moral character period of 5 years. I think I'm under the 5-year rule because actually, no, I'm under the 3-year rule because I got married to a U.S. citizen.
Okay,
Okay?
do I kind of have my?
Cheat sheet. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Good morning, Ms. Jimenez Bachman. How was your drive in from Bend?
Really good, thank you. We're doing it how you should do it, right? I'm not going to be being.
You're not nervous now.
Okay.
So, okay, let me just give me a moment just to look over a few things really quickly. Okay, so what is your current legal name?
Kendra Marissa Jimenez Bachman.
And are you interested in changing your name?
No,
Okay, and I see that you were born in the country of Peru. Any other countries of citizenship?
no. Can I do a little thing? Sorry, and interject really quick. That's a change that has recently happened with the name change. You used to be able to change your name legally as part of this application. It was awesome because you wouldn't have to go through the court or anything like that to change your name. And there's actually, it's still on the form, it says that you can, but you can't. At the local office, they don't have the ability to do the district court, and I think it will come back eventually. But just be aware of that if you, because I've actually had people that are like, so it's a big reason why they naturalized because they wanted to change their name. So for right now in Portland, you are not able to do that.
Right, thank you for that. And can you verify your current physical address?
915 Northwest Gasoline Alley, Suite 205, Bend, Oregon.
Okay, and it looks like you've lived there for the past 5 years, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and neither of your parents is a U.S. citizen. Oh, we didn't do this test.
What?
The naturalization, the civics test.
You can do it again.
Okay,
Does
sorry.
that happen sometimes?
Okay, okay, so neither of your parents are U.S. citizens, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and where are you currently working?
Three Sisters Law.
Okay, and that is in Bend too?
Yes,
And what do you do there at Three Sisters Law?
I'm a lawyer.
Okay, wow, you got a bit of travel there, don't you?
I sure love to travel, yes.
Well, that is interesting. So it looks like you have taken 11 trips in the past 5 years.
I have all the passports here with the stamps if you want to look at them.
Yes, that would be very helpful. So this trip here, it looks like you were out of the country just under 6 months, is that correct? Okay, but no trip for longer than 6 months?
No,
Okay, well, let me just take a look at this and make sure that you have all of the residence requirements. Okay, it looks like you do. What is your current marital status?
married,
Okay, and your spouse is a US citizen, is that correct?
yeah,
And no prior marriages?
no,
Okay, it looks like you have 2 children, just the 2 children?
correct.
Okay. Now we're gonna go ahead and get to some of the questions about your background. Have you ever claimed to be a US citizen in any way?
No,
Have you ever registered to vote or voted in any federal, state, or local election?
no,
Do you owe any overdue federal, state, or local taxes?
No.
Have you ever been a member of any group or club or organization in the United States or anywhere in the world?
no,
Have you ever been a member of or in any way associated with the Communist Party?
No.
A totalitarian party
no,
or a terrorist organization? Have you ever advocated the overthrow of any government by force or violence?
let me just say, I've had this happen before where you know the answer to the question and you know it's gonna be no. And the applicant says no before the officer finishes, and it's really can frustrate the officer, it's disrespectful, so like, wait for them to.
Wait for them to finish, yes. And also one other thing, sometimes they will ask a no question to make sure you're understanding it in a yes format. So they'll say, do you always pay your taxes? That would be yes, I
Yes.
always pay, but the question on the form is, do you owe any overdue? So just make sure, again, breathe, listen to the question and answer the question that's being asked.
Yeah, so you can see she kind of, if you're looking at the form, she's kind of skipping around and she's not asking it exactly as it's written. Some officers will read everything line for line exactly as it's written, but they're not necessarily required to, so they might skip around and they might reword things. And it can be confusing because especially if your English is not as, like because a lot of people work very hard to make sure they know exactly what is in English on this form. But that's one of the tricks that officers can use is they're not going to do it exactly as it's written. They might switch it up a little bit so to test your English.
Right.
So be aware of that. So it actually might be a yes question to what we think everything is no, right? But they might switch it around, so it's actually a yes. So you really need to pay attention and listen to each question. And if you don't understand it, if you think you might have missed it, just ask them to repeat it. That's totally okay.
Absolutely. Now we're going to get to the block of questions that have to do with terrorism, communism, and some officers, I think that the newer officers will literally ask these questions line by line. And sometimes it feels like, why do they keep asking the same question? They're not accusing you of anything. It is literally written out this many times on these forms. Other officers will say, ever commit genocide, torture, killed anyone, or badly hurting anybody? And they go through it like that, and it's just a big no. But then other ones will do it like I'm going to do it with Kendra, and I'm not accusing her of anything, but it is literally written out 7 different ways. Have you ever been involved with genocide?
No,
Torture?
No.
Killing or trying to kill someone?
No.
Badly hurting or trying to hurt a person on purpose?
no,
Not letting someone practice his or her religion? Right, so again, like they can lump all of those questions into 1 or 2 questions or ask them question by question by question. Okay. Have you ever worked, volunteered in any place, anywhere in the world where people were forced to stay?
No.
Have you ever worked in a prison or a detention facility?
No.
Have you ever sold a weapon or given a weapon to a group that uses weapons against other people?
No.
Have you ever received any type of military, paramilitary, or weapons training?
I took a class once on gun safety, but I have all the proper licensing through the state board.
Okay, but was this as part of a military or paramilitary group?
No,
Okay, and do you abide by all of the requirements for your gun license?
Yes.
Okay.
I just put that in there because you, as a resident, you are able to. But you have to be very careful to make sure that you're complying with everything that is required by the state.
Because again, firearms offenses are particularly, make residents particularly. Okay, so it looks like here, I'm looking at your criminal risk history and you have been arrested, is that true?
Yes,
Okay, and it looks like it was one time, is there anything apart from this one time?
no,
And what was the actual charge against you?
driving into the influence.
Okay, and where was that? Where did that happen?
That was in Bend.
Okay, and when was that?
That was in 2013.
Okay, and it looks like here it says diversion.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did you have to do for your diversions?
I had to attend some classes, which I completed, and I went to a camp
Okay,
and did some community service and paid a fine.
okay, do you have those documents with you?
I do.
Okay, and do you have the actual certified copies with you? I see these are copies of the certified, but you
I
have.
do. I have my certified copies that I actually got from the court.
Okay, and can you tell me a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, I just was having dinner and I had a couple of drinks and I got in the car and an officer pulled me over and did the breathalyzer.
Okay, so nobody hurt, no property damage?
No.
Okay, and any other crimes you have committed for which you were not arrested? Okay, thank you for these. Okay, have you ever been a habitual drunkard?
No.
A prostitute or procured anyone for prostitution?
No,
Sold or smuggled controlled substances?
no,
Do you use marijuana?
No.
Have you ever helped anyone to enter or try to enter the United States illegally?
no,
Have you made any misrepresentation to obtain a public benefit?
no,
Have you ever given any U.S. government official false documentation that was false, fraudulent, or misleading?
No.
Have you ever lied to any U.S. government official?
no,
Okay. Do you support the Constitution and form of government of the United States?
yes,
Do you understand the full oath of allegiance?
yes. And this is where I think clients get, see how I was like, no, page after page. You kind of start to get like in this rhythm of no, especially if English isn't your first language. The switch to these yes questions at the very end of the N400, generally you're saying yes to these questions if you want to be sworn into a US citizen. So it's super important to just listen very closely again to these questions.
Okay. So, are you willing to take the full oath of allegiance to the United States?
Yes,
If the law requires it, are you willing to bear arms on behalf of the United States?
Yes.
If the law requires it, are you willing to perform non-combatant services in the U.S. Armed Forces?
yes,
If the law requires it, are you willing to perform work of national importance under civilian direction?
yes,
And another side note is the officer will sometimes explain, this means if there's an earthquake or a hurricane and the National Guard needs you, will you be willing to come and help too? Okay, so I have no problems or issues with your actual application, but right now what I want to do is give you your civics test. Can you name one branch or part of the government?
Commerce.
How many US senators are there?
Oh, sorry, what was that?
I'm sorry. How many US senators are there?
100.
What is the highest court in the United States?
Supreme Court.
Who was the first president of the United States?
George Washington.
Name one problem that led to the Civil War.
Slavery.
And what ocean is on the west coast of the United States? Pretty good. This next spot then. Okay. So,
And
then what happens is they'll have you review all the information on the iPad and then you have to sign it. In order to sign it, you take the stylus, you have to tap on the pink box expands, and you write your signature in there. And if you don't like the way your signature looks, yes, you can do it again and again until you get it right. I know that I have a lot of clients who don't like styluses, they don't like iPads, it's uncomfortable writing your signature there, but that is what will be printed on your certificate. So again, this is your moment, you have passed, it is a great, honor to be a US citizen, so take your time, make sure your signature is okay. And,
so after you have that naturalization certificate, you can get your US passports. So one uncomfortable thing is you work so hard to get that certificate, you actually have to send your original certificate to the Department of State with the DS-11 to get your passport. So how long are they taking?
I think it's, you can generally get it done within 4 to 6 weeks. There is in Seattle, so this is another thing that's common for people. Well, now I'm not a resident and I'm a citizen, but how can I travel? What do I do? And I have a flight that's leaving in a week. So there is the passport agency in Seattle by appointment only. You can call them, schedule an in-person appointment. You have to show either exigent circumstances or travel within a week, I think. Don't quote me on that, but you can look at the website and see. You go there in person, they collect all of your information, and then they will mail you your passport within a day or two. And so because that is what the limbo is, like the limbo is, now I'm a citizen and I need to travel right away, but I don't have my passport. And you have to enter the United States with your US passport.
Right.
That's,
Right.
yeah.
I think that is all that we wanted to cover today. I hope that this was helpful. We're absolutely happy to do consultations. We'll do free consultations, revert from this workshop today. And we do recommend if you do have a criminal history or if you have any issues that you think could come up based on what we've talked about today, to speak with an attorney.
One thing I do really want to check on, when they are adjudicating your naturalization application, they are going to do a precursory or a very deep look at your residency. So if you have any questions about your residency, you also do want to make sure that you are vetting that with an immigration attorney. Just because when I did work for DHS, I saw quite a few people who at a naturalization interview, the officer found an underlying issue with their residency, and that is a quick way to wind up in immigration courts.
Yeah, so that's, for example, maybe there was a waiver that you were supposed to file and U.S.C.I.S or didn't catch that, or the Department of State didn't catch that, and you actually were granted your green card erroneously. So what you're doing when you're applying for naturalization is you're opening the door to be completely investigated, to make sure that you got your green card the right way, that you've been maintaining your residency in the right way, and that you qualify for naturalization. And a lot of times people have decided not to apply for naturalization for that reason, because there's something that may disqualify them or something. So there is, and people do ask this, if there is a process of denaturalization, and there is. If you obtained citizenship by fraud, there's a whole process to that.
Right, there is criminal and civil denaturalization. There's a statute of limitations of 10 years for criminal, but civil, I don't believe there's a statute of limitations, but we digress.
Yeah, as we do. Thank you so
Save
much.
all the scary stuff for the end.